Hi. So I wanted to explore today a bit about this intersection or blending of mysticism and art practice. And essentially, the commonality between these two is accessing deeper states of awareness, the unconscious, whatever you want to call it. Mysticism is kind of just the other side of the coin of creative practice, artistic practice. And Lectio Divina, a divine reading, is a way of connecting and settling in with what is, what's happening through a piece of art, something of beauty, something that you find beautiful in whatever form. And using that as a catalyst to open up your imagination and kind of bring you into a dialogue with that imaginal realm. It's a way of bypassing the criticism and the self-consciousness that can completely crush you, switching into this non-ordinary reality, we'll call it. So Lectio Divina is the practice that I'm going to talk about a bit today, which means divine reading. And the traditional practice was constructed around reading scripture, but I'm using it a little bit more loosely here. And when I present it in sessions and whatnot, this reading can involve any number of different sources. I've used contemporary poetry, music, dreams, visual art, the natural world, anything. So it's really about divining, as it were, into a source of beauty and using that source of beauty as a gateway into your own imagination. I started leading a group on this simple 4-step process that's based on this tradition of Lectio Divina, and I will discuss those 4 steps in a minute. And I was just amazed at the strange and wonderful creativity that came out of people and in conversation. And then I realized this is the whole thing about poetry and other sources of beauty, is that they are doorways into the imagination. And when we sit for a little while and allow ourselves to connect with a source of beauty, then those gateways, those doorways start to open. And then things become really interesting if you can take it to the next level. And that can mean a lot of different things. In the Christian contemplative tradition, that next level is literally a contemplation on gratitude. But if we're talking about creative practice, which we are here, it can mean writing, painting, dancing, whatever form of expression. So the reason for doing a ritual or a practice like this is to practice slowing down and connecting so that it becomes more natural and you can do it with more ease and immediacy. I'm not going to, in any of my work, make some kind of highfalutin promises of transformative and this and that and this. Transformation happens on its own time. I don't think it's something that I can say I can catalyze in you, or you can determine when it's catalyzed in yourself. I think it's something that we court, like we court the muse by inviting beauty into our lives and setting aside time to sit down and practice or be with things of beauty and let them arrive within us. And that's really difficult, especially in such a speed-driven society. So another reason that I created these sessions was because I have a really difficult time sometimes, unless I'm in my studio, and sometimes even then, slowing down enough to actually enter into. So Lectio Divina, there's 4 main steps. Lectio is the first step, and that translates as reading. And you could choose anything to read that you want to, anything that stimulates your interest, moves your heart, moves your soul. It could be a piece of music, a poem, You can use a piece of visual art, really anything, as long as you can sit with it in an atmosphere of enough quietude to let yourself settle down. So meditatio, or meditation, is the second phase, where you kind of just get a sense of what it is you're attracted to in this piece of work. So if it's poetics, the original Lectio Divina was working with scripture. So if it could be one word, it could be a phrase of just a few words, it could be a motif in a musical piece, or a gesture in a dance piece. So you're really driving down and into a little iota of that piece, a little fragment, so that you can begin to discern what the quality is that is really lighting you up right now. We're talking about kinesthetic delight, jouissance. We're following the thread of our desire, our inspiration, because this, when your creative work is led by this, then it really can unfold naturally. It's not always easy. I'm never going to say that about creative process, but there's a life to it when you're following that. And you can also begin to read when that life needs to be rejuvenated, when you need to step back a little bit and have some space. After the meditatio, there is what's called oratio, and that is when you pray on the piece that you have chosen. How are you moved to respond? And you don't want to overthink this. That's always the trick with everything, right? So this isn't a practice of how do I translate this into this, and how do I make it clear that I got this inspiration from this line from Rilke. That's the conceptual mind. So this is more that whatever medium you most would like to try, whatever medium you're most comfortable in, whatever medium gives you the most joy and excitement, whatever medium is accessible to you, do that. Do some movement, write some words, paint, play some music, play a chord, whatever it is. You're leaning into a ritual structure here and letting that ritual structure carry you, and you continue to contemplate, meditate, and respond, so that you're kind of dancing around the conceptual mind in this. So it's a light touch, and I often suggest that you just, again, like amplification, which is a technique in dream work, where you return to a dream image over and over again. That's the way that you can work with this oratio step, is that in order to maintain a connection with the line or the piece of beauty that's catalyzing your inspiration, your connection with beauty, is you read or even speak that line as you're working. Or perhaps you have that image, an image of an image, like if you've keyed in on a particular color in an image, then you put that color around your studio, so you're saturating in it, so you can revisit it without it becoming a big conceptual complicated thing. If it's a piece of music, that's an easy one. You can put it on loop. So the last step of Lectio Divina is contemplation. This is the time of reflection. Sometimes this would be the time where you divine into the work that you've done. Sometimes it's a little bit too soon to do that right afterwards, but it depends on the context. And offering gratitude is kind of a traditional thing that you do during this phase. Gratitude for yourself for showing up, and the acknowledgement that within this experience itself, built in, you are connecting with something larger than yourself, and you want to acknowledge that. A simple reference here is you've been looking at somebody else's work. So this is another human mind, at the very least, that has brought something into your world. So there's an acknowledgement of a connection to something greater than yourself, a source that is beyond yourself. So I use this practice to nourish my own practice, to continue reminding myself that there's a big inspiring world out there, and tapping into that, especially if I'm feeling frustrated or stagnant, or there's judgmental or critical voices coming up for me, is really lightens things up and expands things. It reminds me that I'm part of a really profound lineage and movement of human beings that have explored human beingness through aesthetic channels. It reminds me that there's always something rich waiting under the surface. So in the sessions I teach, I've often focused on contemporary poetry, and people get all worried with the word poetry. I don't understand it, I don't get it, and it's kind of like, it doesn't matter what you use, and that's the whole point, is you can literally find one word, and that word can trigger something in you, especially if you're drawn to it. Or you don't like painting, you don't get painting, especially abstract painting, what the hell. But if you look at a piece long enough, there will be some color or some quality of line that, or especially if it gets your ire up, if it irritates the shit out of you, that is often the source of some really good stuff for your own creative practice, just to explore. So really, this is the gateway in to exploring your own perception, your own way of being, your own medium, because you are your own medium. And in that sense, that reflexive sense that it encourages, you're no longer competing with anyone. You can't. You've got yourself, you are the medium, you are your own tool, and then there's this world of all these other cells around you that are constantly cross-pollinating osmosis and diffusion, and so that just reminds you. So it's also a practice of reminding you that the world is always out there and you're breathing with it. So it does remind you, as cheesy and cliched as it might sound, that you're connected, and you're connected with something larger, and there is always something going on beneath the surface. A lot of times resistance comes in the form of boredom or irritation for me, tiredness. And in a ritual practice like this, a simple one, you can just move through. You don't have to kind of do a heavy-handed, I've got to force myself to deal with this, I've got to force myself to try to see beneath this. It just is inherent in the practice. Another thing I'd like to mention, I'm in a turning point or a shift of some kind in my own practice right now. And it's one thing to have a concept in your head and another to begin to practice it. And this practice of Lectio Divina really encourages a rhythm of listening. And in order to listen, you first have to inhabit yourself. So that is, especially in a guided session, that's built in. And again, it's a live exploration. You have to learn to be curious about how you are able to or not able to inhabit. You can only actually listen when you are settled within yourself. So there's a process and a practice of learning to settle within yourself, and or learning to recognize when you're not settled and what you might need in order to tend to that unsettledness. And then your work comes much more easily as a response, rather than this it's even in the language that you hear, is you've got to take this source and then you apply it to your work. And how does this source, how is it applied? How did this source inspire your work? That's all very, very conceptual. I actually oftentimes have no effing clue how I'm inspired. And then something like, one example is, I lived in Mexico for a number of months in Guanajuato, and I was working on visual art, and people will say, oh, you're gonna paint the colors of Mexico, da 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 da, and I was kind of like, bullshit. Like, I'm not a literalist that way. I just work and I'll see what happens. Well, my palette changed completely. I was surrounded by completely different colors, a lot of vibrant colors in that particular city, and lines, quality of architecture was very surreal. And so I was kind of doing a photo based Lectio Divina every day because it was a new environment and I was really excited about these different qualities, and it just kind of came through in the work. So I think I'm just inviting, and this practice, this ritual invites you to lay aside all of those questions of, oh, if I'm supposed to know where this is coming from, or I'm supposed to take this line from Rilke and apply it to my work. Don't worry about that. Just move. You're just moving from step to step. So just to recap, again, we're talking about mystical practices and how they are pretty much the other side of the coin of artistic practices from a certain perspective, and how we can use a ritual practice like Lectio Divina to inspire, to recognize the beauty in the world around us, to recognize what it is specifically in a piece of work that either troubles us or inspires us or irritates us, provokes us in some way. I offer sessions on an ongoing basis, group sessions where you can just drop in and pay what you wish in order to kind of get a feel for how I lead these things. And then there are deeper immersions where we focus on a theme and explore different ways of interpreting Lectio Divina. So that's it for today. Thanks for listening.